Yes.
My name is Perry Aftab, and I run Wired Safety. We're the Internet Safety Charity.
Yes.
And one thing I'd like to compliment eBay on, we're talking about the three legs that you're talking about, whether it's eBay itself or PayPal or Skype, but you've done a great deal for charities.
Yes.
Supporting them, allowing charities to sell things and offer them, and allowing people to buy things and get tax donations. So I think you need to credit yourself with that as a very important part of what's happening.
Yes.
And what you brought to the table.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Let me just actually just take a minute to describe what has come about, because this is the internet. This is classic internet. We did not think of it. We did not create it. Our sellers came to us and said, you know, many of us are involved in our local communities, or we have a favorite charity, and we'd love to find a way to donate part of our proceeds to that charity. So we said, oh, that's a good idea. And so what evolved is a program called GivingWorks, where any eBay seller can say, I want to donate some portion of the proceeds of this auction or of this sale to this charity. And so it's raised over $150 million for over 10,000 charities over the last 5 years. And I'll give you an example of what happens. Whenever I sell anything on eBay, I always donate 100% of the proceeds to charity. And I sold, I left it outside so it wouldn't ring. I bought a new cell phone on eBay. By the way, I saved 50% on my new cell phone. And I sold my old one. And so I put it up and I said, in the listing, 100% of the proceeds of this auction will go to NRDC, because I care a lot about environmental causes. And 3 days later, I got an email from a buyer saying, I bought your cell phone, and I'm thrilled. It was a buyer in New Hampshire. He says, I'm a deep believer in the environment, and I love the fact that not only am I buying a used cell phone, so a new one doesn't have to be made, but that all the money I'm spending is going to charity. So I want you to know I'm paying you more for this cell phone than the other ones available, but I feel great about it. And sure enough, he bid the auction to above what he could have bought a comparable one for. So you feel great about that. So I always trade anonymously on eBay, which is because I want to get the typical experience, which is usually good, but not always. And our employees hear about it when it's not good. So I'm packaging the cell phone, put it in a box. It's going to go off to New Hampshire, and I just put a note on a stationer. I said, by the way, I'm the CEO of eBay, and thanks very much for your business. And I sent it off. Well, my second son goes to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, and 2 months later, I was in New Hampshire. I'm walking through the airport, and one of the baggage handlers comes up to me and says, "Are you the CEO of eBay?" And anytime someone says that to you, "Are you a lawyer?" It depends who you are. But I said yes, and he says, "I bought your cell phone." And he points outside and he says, "See these hills of New Hampshire? I love the fact that the money I spend for the cell phone is going to preserve the environment." And here's the point. We didn't create that. eBay, PayPal, I would argue some of the other internet companies as well, are platforms that enable the creativity and entrepreneurialism of people around the world. And that's what you helped create. And when you feel pressure, when people say, oh, there's stolen goods on eBay, well, we have 3,000 people fighting stolen goods, counterfeits, and other things. The secondary market is not the problem. The problem, if it's anywhere, should go into law enforcement, should go into fighting counterfeits, should go into other things. So I really encourage you, consumer protection is not the same thing as consumer empowerment. And I know there are a lot of pressures on you to set guidelines to restrain trade in some way. Anyway, thanks for the question. I promise a shorter answer on this one.
A great story and a great business. I'm Mark McCarthy with Georgetown University. You mentioned that your cross-border traffic is about 20% of your total volume.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because the same study that you referred to, the EU study,
yeah,
shows that they're sort of stuck around 7% within the EU. So how come you're doing so much better?
Well, I think PayPal has really facilitated cross-border in Europe because, as you know, the banking systems, while there may be a euro common currency, the banking systems and the payment habits differ tremendously across Europe. So the way Germans like to pay is different than the way Italians like to be paid. And PayPal has really greased those skids because it's made it really easy for anyone to pay or be paid across borders. I'd also challenge our European colleagues, and I've had the privilege of spending time in Brussels, that some of the pressures are greatest in Europe to create boundaries, to create impediments that will, in essence, rather than protecting the consumer, I believe will lead to higher prices and fewer jobs. And so whether it's parallel imports or selective distribution, I encourage our European colleagues to keep a close eye on that. Because at the end of the day, in this economic times, jobs and lower prices are what every citizen needs. And I think e-commerce is both consumer friendly and job friendly. And cross-border competition makes, I believe, a healthier market for both.
Hi, I'm Pippa Lawson. I'm
Hi,
past
Pippa.
director and now an associate with the Canadian Internet Policy and Public Interest Clinic at the University of Ottawa in Canada. And I just chaired a panel on C2C commerce.
Yes.
At our,
I heard about it. Ronnie was telling me about it over lunch.
You weren't there. But let me just ask the sort of unpleasant question about online auction fraud being such a high proportion of complaints about the internet to authorities. Is that a necessary cost for all these benefits that you've been describing, or is there more that we can and should be doing to reduce it?
Well, obviously I wasn't at your panel, and so the specific online auction fraud you're referring to, I'm not certain about. Let me characterize what we see. And what's interesting is the internet is evolving on this front. So on eBay, we have 3,000 people who work full-time, actually 5 when you count PayPal, full-time, keeping fraud and counterfeit and problems off. And the bar is rising. It's getting harder and harder to sell on eBay because of the fraud and counterfeit work that we do. We work with law enforcement authorities around the world. We work with, we have sophisticated fraud and detection mechanisms. And the data we have is less than 1% of the transactions are fraudulent transactions. And we now provide a money-back guarantee for anyone that has a bad experience on eBay and pays with PayPal. So the eBay marketplace, I think, is perhaps the safest marketplace for a marketplace in the world, and we treat this very seriously, more seriously than I would argue anyone in the world. In the C2C world, the format that's really emerging is classifieds. And in the US, that's Craigslist. In Canada, that's Kijiji, and other markets. And that's a market that's, it's Gumtree in the UK. We own Gumtree, we own Kijiji. Now it's being called La Bon Coin, we don't own, I wish we did in France, for the French people here. And traditionally classifieds, what made that a safe place is the buyer and seller actually interact with one another in the C2C world. Really easy to list, and you hand off the good and pay. The two areas that we're focusing on there is on eBay-owned sites around the world, you will not have personal ads. There will not be any, and you will check eBay-owned sites around the world. We have banned, let's call it adult categories, and personal ads, which are one major source of where problems happen. That is not true about Craigslist, of which we own 28%. If we owned more, we would change it. We can't, but so we believe strongly in that. And then the second thing is warning about when the people come together to make sure it's a safe experience. And so we now screen all listings and track the sellers, and so that when we see suspicious behavior, suspicious things, we act on it. So there's always going to be examples, but it's something that we feel deeply committed to fighting. Thank you for the question.